Hey there, my wedding planning friends, and welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, thanks so much for clicking on my video. I'm Emily Summer. I'm a wedding planner based in Montana, and I make weekly videos on wedding planning tips and advice. So today's topic is about one of my personal favorite things, planning a wedding, which is probably not the same as any of you. But today we're going to talk all about wedding day timelines and how to create one. So I did a video quite a while back on creating a day of timeline, and while it was very detailed and thorough, that video is pretty old now. It was from pretty much right when I started doing wedding planning YouTube videos, and it's also very lengthy, and so I feel like I made it a little bit more overcomplicated than it needs to be, or it seemed like it in that video. So the purpose of today's is to kind of tell you about how to create a wedding day timeline for your wedding day, but have it simplified. So it really doesn't have to be that difficult or time consuming. At this point, granted, I've done 100 of these. I can do a wedding day timeline in about 20 minutes. So it really doesn't have to be that time consuming or that difficult. So hopefully today's video will help you with that and help kind of just simplify the process of creating your very own wedding day timeline. So if you have a wedding day coordinator or a wedding planner, it is likely that they will be doing this part for you. But even if you do have somebody that's creating a timeline for you, this video will be helpful on knowing what to expect and kind of what your responsibilities will be when it comes to the timing details related to your wedding. And if you don't have a wedding planner or wedding coordinator, then hopefully this video will be super helpful in helping you create one, because I highly, highly, highly recommend, regardless of the size of your wedding, regardless of if you have a coordinator or not, you should always have a wedding day of timeline. All right, so first of all, when it comes to the timing of your wedding day, you really don't need to know a whole lot of the timing details too far in advance of your wedding. Most of that you will finalize as you get a little bit closer in the months leading up to your wedding. However, there are a few things that you should know fairly early in the planning, as vendors will start to ask for them fairly early on, or it will dictate some of the pricing and packaging that you choose for some of your vendors. So the things that you should know earlier on are obviously your ceremony start time. This will probably be one of, if not the very first timing related decision that you make. This is something that you will put on all of your invitations to when you have those in advance on your wedding website. You don't need to have the time when you send out save the dates if you are sending out save the dates, just the date for that one. But your ceremony start time, your dinner start time is another good thing to have, which you want to ask yourself if you plan to have a cocktail hour in between your ceremony and your reception, or before your dinner. If that's something you plan to do, then that will kind of dictate what your start time for your dinner is. So if you are planning to have a cocktail hour, usually that will be a full 60 minutes from the end of your ceremony time until you go in and do your dinner. So kind of factor that in for that. And then you also want to know your ending time. So this might be dictated by the time that your venue requires you to leave or to have music off, or whatever the parameters are there, or if it's just a personal preference of when you want to end things. Have an idea of when the reception will end, so when the music will stop and everyone will leave. These three things are the main things that you will need for during the planning process fairly far in advance from your wedding date. Like I said, everything else will be confirmed in the 2 to 3 months leading up to your wedding day. So when it comes to making your day of timeline, you probably want to start drafting this out 2 to 3 months before your wedding date. Like I said, you will likely have some holes and things to fill in, but that's kind of a good starting point to kind of start structuring your overall day of timeline. So to do this, what I usually do is start with your ceremony start time, and that's kind of your anchor. That's where you're going to start and kind of work backwards and forwards from there. We'll start with your ceremony start time, and there are some questions you want to ask yourself that is going to dictate kind of how you move forward from here. So the first question is, do you plan to have a first look? A first look is basically when you and your partner will have a scheduled time to see each other prior to the wedding ceremony. So the first look would not be when one of you is walking down the aisle. It is a scheduled time, usually about 2 hours before the ceremony start time, that the photographer will document you guys having an intimate moment together separately prior to the ceremony. Whether you choose to do a first look or not will affect your getting ready timeline and your photography timeline, as that will be kind of your starting point for when photos will start and when you need to be hair and makeup ready, and again dictating when your photos will start for getting ready photos, detail shots, getting into your dress, and all of those. Going off of this, the next thing you want to ask is, are those getting ready photos and detail photos important to you? If so, you want to make sure you have good scheduled time before your first look or before your ceremony to make sure that you're getting those photos. And lastly, How many photos do you plan on taking prior to your ceremony? So if you are doing a first look, that allows for you to be able to do a ton of your photos before your ceremony. You can do all your bridal party pictures, you can do family photos, you can do couple photos. Most of your photos can be done prior to the ceremony, so that frees up time afterwards. You can just knock out some family portraits during cocktail hour, but not have to spend your entire cocktail hour doing pictures. If that's the case, then obviously you will have more lead time before the ceremony when it comes to creating your day of timeline that you want to make sure that you have scheduled with your photographer and other vendors that might need to be present for those. So once you've answered those questions and kind of figured those timing details out, then you want to set your photography or videography schedule. So this will be based on the package that you hired them for. So usually it's by hours, usually 6, 8, 10, 12 hours are pretty common for wedding photos and videos. So for example, if you hired your photographer for 8 hours, you want to use those timing details you've already figured out to kind of schedule them where it makes sense. So if detail photos are important to you, if getting ready photos are important to you, and you are doing a first look, then you're going to have them a little bit heavier on the first part of the day and probably leaving a little bit earlier into the night. So they're likely not going to be there until the very end of the night. On the flip side, if you do want to have a formal exit that you want to have documented at the very end of the night, then you will have your photographer until the end of the night, and you will have them heavier on the later part during the reception and not there as early doing the detail shots and getting ready photos. After those vendors, you want to figure out your hair and makeup schedule. So using whether you're doing a first look or not as kind of your starting point, then you would work backwards. So like I said, if you are doing a first look, that's essentially when you'll have the first like formal photos taken. So typically a first look is like 2 hours before ceremony start time. So if you had a ceremony at 5 p.m., we would do your first look at about 3 o'clock. And then you want to have your photographer arrive probably 30 to 60 minutes before that first look, so that you can do photos of bridal portraits of you getting ready or faking getting ready, some detail shots, some pictures of you getting into your dress, and then not be rushing to get ready for your first look. So usually about 1 hour, 45 minutes prior to your first look is when you would need to be completely done with hair and makeup. So that's kind of your ending point for your hair and makeup, and then typically what they'll do is kind of work backwards from there. So you'll work with your hair and makeup artists on the timeline. You don't really have to come up with the timing of all that. They'll kind of schedule in based on how many people you have getting hair and makeup done, but you definitely want to have a hard stop point and be able to communicate that to your hair and makeup artist. So having that point, kind of working backwards, that will dictate your hair and makeup start time, and that's typically the first thing that's going to go on your day of timeline is that hair and makeup start time, as that's likely the first thing that's happening. You're going to be starting fairly early if you have a lot of gals that are getting ready. Okay, so I'm just gonna pause for a second, make sure we're all on the same page. So we started with your ceremony start time, figured out your ending time, figured out what time your dinner was going to happen, and then started to go in and fill in some of those blanks. So next we're gonna go into the reception schedule. So typically right after the cocktail hour, that kind of kicks off your reception, usually started by dinner. So dinner will be the first thing, which we've already figured out your dinner start time. So that's kind of the first thing that will go onto your reception schedule is your dinner start time. You want to make sure that you are allowing for the time it takes to go from your cocktail hour to your reception and put that into your day of schedule as well. So say you want to have a dinner start time of 6:30, you're not going to go, okay, my cocktail hour is going to go from 5:30 to 6:30, then dinner starts at 6:30. You're going to go 5:30, 6:15. You'll probably need to make an announcement to get guests seated for dinner so that dinner can start at 6:30. Hopefully that makes sense. When thinking about this, you also want to ask yourself if you would like to have a grand entrance. So a grand entrance is when you are announced into your reception. Usually it is either just the couple that will be announced for the first time as husband and wife, or a lot of couples will choose to have their entire bridal party introduced as well. And it's usually by pair going into the reception, ending with the maid of honor and best man before the bride and groom are announced. So if that's something you want to do, you want to make sure that you are planning for that timing before dinner starts as well. After dinner, the things to plan and schedule for are toasts, cake cutting, first dance, parent dances, father-daughter, mother-son dance, and if you plan to do a bouquet or garter toss. Typically, what I will do with the order of these is to go right into dinner and do toast at the end. This is totally your own personal preference. Some couples will choose to do the toast before dinner. If you are only doing one toast, it works pretty well to do it before dinner. If you have more than one or two, I recommend doing toast afterwards. Guests don't really like to wait, especially once they go in and think they're about to have dinner, sit and wait 20, 30 minutes before they can actually eat listening to toast. I find that saving toast till the end of dinner kind of fills in that space really nicely as well, especially if you're having a buffet where guests have to wait kind of a while before they can actually get their food. Once everyone has gone through the buffet line, you can start toast, and that way you can have toast happening while that last group of people are eating. So it kind of fills in that lag so that the first group that goes to the buffet isn't sitting there with nothing to do for 45 minutes. They can start listening to toast once they finish dinner. So that helps the flow of the evening, is to do toast towards the end. And then similarly, if you are doing a cake cutting ceremony, if your cake and dessert is going to be indoors or in the same location as where you are having your dinner, it works really well to go into that right after your toast, and that way no one has to move. People can kind of see this happening from their own seat inside, and do your cake cutting ceremony right after that. Typically after that, we would then have the first dance, followed by the father-daughter and the mother-son dance. And then all that's left is the bouquet and garter toss if you choose to do that. And those can be kind of fit in wherever makes sense. You don't have to go right into that right after those formal dances. That's something you can do later in the night. Again, that's a personal preference, and you can kind of talk to your DJ or whoever will be running the reception and running the music for your reception on what your desires are here. The only other couple of things that you want to think about when it comes to your timing of your reception are if you plan to have golden hour or sunset pictures taken, and if you plan to do a formal exit, which I kind of touched on earlier. Those two will likely play a pretty big role in your end of night timing. So if you are planning on doing golden hour or sunset photos with your photographer, be conscientious of what this time is going to be when scheduling things like your first dance and toast and all of that, as sometimes those tend to coincide. So ideally, you want to be done with all those formal things when you go to take your sunset photo, so that guests aren't waiting on you to take pictures to be able to move on through the evening. It's really, really nice if you can be done with the first dance, parent dances, toast, cake cutting, and everything, and then go off to your sunset pictures. And that way guests can just kind of mingle and hang out and start dancing while they're waiting for you, and then you come back and join the party. And lastly, if you plan to do a formal exit, this is going to dictate the very end of the night. If you want to do something like a sparkler send-off, likely you will want that to be documented by your photographer. So like I mentioned earlier, if that's the case, you want to make sure that you have your photographer scheduled until the very end of the night so that they are getting that coverage. And then that kind of ends your timeline for the day. So usually at this point is when, if you have any shuttles, those will be added in, and you want to make sure that you have a final shuttle whenever the reception is ending. So for example, you have to be out, music off, and everybody leaving at 11, so you'd have your last song at like 10:55, and then 11 o'clock is when your reception would end. After that, you can go in and fill in all of your vendor information as far as arrivals and setups. So once you have this kind of shell of a timeline of when things are happening, communicate that to all necessary vendors, and then fill in their arrival and timing. And typically those vendors will know what they need as far as setup time goes and arrival times based on the information that you already provided them for ceremony start time or dinner start time or whatever those main points are. They will let you know how much time they need based on that. So the vendors that you want to check in and make sure you're scheduling their arrival times are your florist, especially if they are delivering and installing. Typically they'll work off of your ceremony start time and your photo start time to make sure that they have your personal flowers like your bouquet and any detail like loose blooms for detail photos on site by that time, and then have everything ready to go by your ceremony start time. Your DJ for arrival and setup in time for the ceremony, catering, both alcohol and food, as well as your desserts if that's coming from a separate caterer. And lastly, wedding coordinator if you do have one, which like I said, if you do, they're going to schedule themselves and they will likely be doing everything that I am telling you to do here. Okay, I feel like that was more simplified. I really hope I didn't just confuse you even more, but really a wedding day timeline is crucial for just kind of the overall flow of your wedding day. It's so nice to have everything planned out and be able to just send that off to your vendors and ensure that everything is going to run smoothly. You're not really having to keep track of things on the day of as far as timing goes and knowing what's coming next. You can kind of have that all scheduled ahead of time and all the vendors are on the same page and know exactly what's happening and when. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe to get weekly videos on wedding planning tips and advice, and we'll see you next week.